Good morning, friends. This is the last day in June of 2025. I just wanted to look back some, do some summary work regarding Cascadian Synergetics, which is a somewhat newer meme on my end. It's a collaborative work. A lot of what I do is collaborative. Synergy means unity too. It's like I work best. Two heads are better than one, like that. You always hear people wondering what's smarter than a human? Like, here we are looking out into space. Who's smarter than humans? Well, two humans. Remember, two heads is better than one, and so on. It's like we are collectively, as a group, far more intelligent than any one of us taken alone, one might say. On the other hand, groupthink is a term of it's derogatory usually. When you get stuck in groupthink, that's like the herd and everyone thinking the same silly thought, and there's peer pressure to not break ranks, to not say the emperor has no clothes, and so on. So there's a lot of dynamics to think about and discuss when it comes to the level of intelligence. Because again, a civilization, in taking advantage of everybody's input or a lot of people's input, is able to create things like computers that no one person just sitting alone in a room or with all the supplies you can imagine, like one person in a well-equipped lab, is very unlikely to have enough knowledge to create, say, a computer, but working with others, which is not to detract from the fame and glory of various individuals who contribute mightily to this, that, and the other. Now, why do I bring all this up? Well, because I think as a region, say bioregion, Cascadia, just define that, has an inside and an outside. It's very not sharply defined in any way, right? But there's this sense of a place that exports. It's got good cheeses. There's a lot of coffee roasting goes on, wine, a lot of Oregon wine, but Washington wine, California wine. We'll call it Cascadian wine. We go up into Canada. Okay, so there's a lot of physical exports. I haven't even mentioned wood products. Goes on, right? And then there's some entertainment. There's like the film industry has gotten fairly big here in a lot of ways. So let's just say, and of course, athletic things like hiking and skiing and just outdoors. Camping is big. All right, so there's that. Now, why not add synergetics to that as a kind of blend of not just classroom math and sort of philosophy, but also out there in the world, like athletic stuff, like creating asylum cities. We've got the tiny house cities going on. I shouldn't call them cities. Tiny little communities. What is the Buddhist word for community? Sangha. Okay, so we're creating these little communities. We don't have the religious framework in secular societies that allows so many people, especially young people, to quote unquote find themselves in organized religion. And I'm not decrying that necessarily. And we do, by the way, have a lot of religions. I'm just saying I don't think we have as big a framework for young adults as, say, Thailand maybe. The way it's set up in some nations is because there is something almost, well, you could call it a state religion. It's like if you don't want to go into the military, you do have a disciplined lifestyle available to you with elders and people who've been there, and it's like you can park your body in a sort of matrix for a while and do a next phase of growth. And I often think about how we're lacking that in many ways in the North American context. And I'm wondering about Cascadia. Sort of, I'm not suggesting organized religion or cult so much as something more organically arising out of the school system in the sense of work study. What about the work part? And we do have a lot of work study going on. But I've been engaged, for example, in work study. It's very interesting to me to go to a farm, a working farm in the sense of under cultivation. It's not just fields, but fields with seeds and wheel lines and reel lines and tractors, gators, all these different things, right? All this sort of like gardening, because in this particular case, the primary crop is wildflowers. It's very pretty, but it's on a scale that a gardener would balk at because, for one thing, most of the equipment is too big and heavy to move as just a human, right? We don't have that much muscle power. We're not horses, and farms used to be impossible without a stable of horses that would work. But now we have a stable of tractors, two or three maybe. I was on one of the smaller ones, dragging this reel line, which it unspools this hose as you pull the tractor. It unspools this long line of it takes water through the hose to a sprinkler, and then as it sprinkles, it also retracts. The water pressure causes the reel line to drag the sprinkler across the field. But first you have to get it to the end of the field. And just pulling it as a human, or even 5 humans maybe it would take, or how many, quote, energy slaves. By the way, thank you to Dante for this, a actual hard copy of this book by Buckminster Fuller. It's got the word slaves in it, and so you might get kicked off a listserv like I was. I wasn't actually kicked off, but people rose. There was a ruckus because of all the sensitivity. It's kind of like the Quakers got rid of oversight committee, right? Because overseer sounds kind of slave-owny. I was just thinking more like supervisor. Are we going to get rid of supervisors? We have supervised learning. Surprised we didn't do like a GitHub there and take that away over. Well, maybe supervisor's okay. It's got the word super, though. Could be controversial. Anyway, I'm just making nonsense here. But the point is, we are in need of a kind of an oversight, planning mode. My dad was a planner. And I don't think that we have to be so sensitive about these words that we can't talk about, slaves, energy slaves, and so on, and have that word mean something different. That was Fuller's point in revectoring the word slave. He's like, look at the machines as slaves, and that's actually probably a healthier attitude than projecting all of this, attributes into chatbots and so on that don't belong or don't have to be projected into that. Like, they are more like chatterbox. I think of them as gossip machines. Chatterbox gossip machines, but informed gossip. Gossip often has a connotation of not being well informed, but informed gossip. So when I check on Cascadian Synergetics, which is an outgrowth, by the way, of the whole place-based theme here on this channel from the beginning, and talking about how I think teaching can be effective, I always push the place-based, which means geographically aware, for one thing. You've got a locus, you've got a location to focus on, like Sesame Street, even if it's fictional. You've got a place. So place-based can just mean it's not even a real place, but you've got a place to come back to. It's mnemonic value there. That's the memory palace and so on. Sesame Street helped tie things together by giving you a focus. That's the origin of place-based in the cloud, you could say, without being anchored to a real place. But in going with Cascadia, which I invite you, by the way, with Cascadian Synergetics, I'm saying you should import it into your world as such. In other words, just like Oregon wine or cheese, give a talk at your school and say, here's Cascadian Synergetics, what they're doing out in the Silicon Forest, right? And that's the kind of place-based education that's the next step, is where you anchor it to an actual geographical location. In my case, I've been talking a lot about the Silicon Forest, and Silicon Forest math, or digital math of the Silicon Forest, as I put it up on Wiki Educator, it's all branding. was my four maths, right? Supermarket, casino, Martian, and Neolithic. Those are the four maths. They're broad stroke categories in which to throw a lot of topics into each one. They're bags of topics, each one. And Martian math is where I threw most of the lattice based concentric hierarchy polyhedral. Nested polyhedra will say nested polyhedra in a lattice. That kind of thinking is what's in synergetics and goes in Martian math. It's kind of right brain, very computer graphic-y. It's something, that takes you into visualizations quite a bit, model making and so on. Martian math. Supermarket math is a lot about distribution. It's a lot about trucking exchange, work study. Join the university, major in trucking. It's a huge major. It's got all sides to it. It's data science, it's transportation engineering. And if you want to go up the ladder in trucking, say, in terms of academia, getting more and more credit, get your PhD or your doctorate in trucking, you might find yourself riding shotgun, meaning as a passenger, in, say, China or Iran, right? And you'll be taking in the culture. And the whole purpose of trucking is to have the pilots or the drivers be good at what they do, which means interact well with the people and have some language skills, cultural understanding. So definitely it's worth a college major, university approach to trucking, right? At these levels where you're flying around the world and driving trucks, eventually you can drive them as well as sit shotgun. But it's a whole thing that we're designing under the heading. You could say of supermarket math, but there's risk involved. There's always risk, so there's always casino math, roll of the dice. And Neolithic math, we look back with respect and awe sometimes at the knowledge of the ancestors, you could say. Neolithic math is a catch-all. It's looking back, and Martian math can also be taken as a catch-all. If you just want it to mean a timeline into the future, into the past, into Martian math, into Neolithic math, you could take it that way. And then at every age, no matter where you are in a time slice, you always have risk and distribution, harvest, supermarket, casino. As that evolves over time, those functions are always there institutionally. From the earliest tribe and the smallest tribe, you've got risk management and you've got division of labor. And then as you roll forward and get bigger civilization, like I was saying, group think in a positive sense, you got all the websites. Like I've got a little supermarket implemented in Python with little classes like the supermarket class and the customer, the shopper, who gets instantiated and pushes through a supermarket with their little. It's all conceptual. It really helps though if you can imagine these things, right? Sometimes people think going into computer programming or computers means that you're supposed to sacrifice your imagination and become very lexical and boring and just looking at, symbols or something. It's not the best way to think of it, though. I find that going into computer programming fires up your imagination because you got to imagine all this stuff. Like if you're simulating a farm, you're programming a farm simulator or a supermarket simulator, you got to imagine and think about all aspects of farming, which is where having real hands-on experience, like I was saying, I've been enjoying doing this work study. That to me is where I want to go with Cascadian Synergetics. It's not just about watching somebody talk about quadrats, although that's important. I'm going to end with that because we had a mini summit recently. We've had there are faculty that mingle around here in the Cascadian. Sometimes they come through Portland, sometimes they go to my backyard and we hang out, and there's C60 sculpture. That's also at the farm. I took Ryan there to see this Flextegrity Museum, small collection, and that's near Springfield. We have all over the region, you could say, potential sites where we could actually do stuff, pilot stuff, and the universities could, provide the vans and the faculty, and the locations would be, chosen organically. But if you want to understand how windmill, electrical generator windmill works, call that a windmill. You want to go there and you want to get the tour and you want to talk to the maintenance folks, and if you want to understand Bonneville, I really loved going there as a kid and seeing the giant hydro dams and stuff. So field trips that you don't just walk around as a group and gawk and listen, but you also get your hands dirty and start doing stuff like farming, like whatever jobs, right? Dirty jobs even. You're a PhD candidate, you're working hard in academia, and yet sometimes the jobs mean getting your hands dirty. We don't duplicate this sort of classism you find in England and stuff where it's like, oh, you're a gentleman, therefore you never get your hands dirty. No dirt under the nails, even figuratively. Well, we're going to do that. We're going to have a full, well-rounded, Cascadia is going to be full, well-rounded in its approach to education, let's put it. And on that score, I'm glad that Epcot West got caught up in this gossip here, this chatterbox output about Cascadian Synergetics, which I have been sharing around because I think it's pretty on target. I said I'd end with quad rays. What were they for? Like, they are an alternative way to map space, just like XYZ. They're isomorphic to XYZ. Once you accept that there's a canonical form for the points representation, you don't get stuck with the equivalence class problem. If you know what I'm talking about, good. If you don't worry about it. It's really just a math thing, a coordinate system, but it's useful because of the 4D. And that meme is such an important meme. When you get into Cascadian Synergetics, you want to understand that word meaning trajectories, what I call scions in cultigory theory. Word meaning trajectories are such that you can have namespaces wherein 4D means something different in each of them, and it's very good to see that, to disentangle your thinking, because if you can't sense the namespaces out there, you're going to have name collisions all over the place, and it's going to be hard to sort things out. So study Python just to get the namespaces idea, if you like. But then, check it out. It's got to do with, what we're talking about is 4D. It's got to do with what is the meaning of the scion, PSYON, 4D in the namespace of Synergetics. And therefore in the namespace in which Synergetics sits, and therefore in Silicon Forest math and Martian math. And therefore in the Silicon Forest, and therefore in Cascadia, we're vibing about the word dimension out here and understanding about namespaces and doing 3 namespaces that each contains 4D, right? And quad rays help us bridge into the Bucky way of doing 4D, but there's, the 4Ds all interconnect. There's the Einstein 4D, and there's I call it the Coxeter 4D, but it's the Hilbert space 4D, the one behind machine learning. So if you know about Hilbert space and dimensionality in the extended Euclidean sense, vector spaces and like that, linear algebra, that's huge, right? You can spend your whole life in that swimming pool. And then Einstein's 4D, 3D plus time and all this relativity and so on, that's a huge namespace. You can spend your whole life in that. And then the Synergetics 4D is much more focused on what I call the nested hierarchy in a lattice, and thinking kind of in a right brain style, in a humanities mode where you're bumping up against Descartes and Euler for sure, but also McLuhan, James Joyce, Ezra Pound. You're in the space of Hugh Kenner, looking out at all kinds of math topics, but through maybe a humanities prism. That's how I see Synergetics, as poetics. And I don't mean that as a step down. It's you can do higher math in philosophy, and philosophy and poetics, they intertwine, right? Swedenborg kind of stuff. I mean, it's hard to sort out what everyone means when they dive deep into their own psyche and come up with some kind of private language. You can only dive into so many languages in a lifetime. And Synergetics is, it's a commitment. And I'm not saying everyone should do it, and I'm not saying it should be your whole focus, right? That your whole life has to be this, that, or some other namespace. It tends to be that in the case of like super religions, where you're really sucked in, okay? You can become entirely sucked in by, say, a religious namespace. And I'm not saying fight it, I'm just saying, okay, brainwashing occurs. It's necessary. We're born not tabula rasa, but we are born with big brains that need to be programmed and reprogrammed. Sometimes that's what we neglect. The longer we live now, the more it's often necessary to what I call go back to high school, right? Don't assume that it's a linear thing where you know more and more and more and more. It's more like you got to hit the reset button every so often and get back to basics. Don't just build your house of cards on the foundation you're handed, say, when you're 10 years old. Maybe when you're 30, it's time for a new foundation. Maybe you won't have as big a midlife crisis if you prepare in advance for the need to re-brainwash periodically through your life. That's kind of what I would suggest using Synergetics for. Get off the train, get off what you're on if you don't like where you're going, and you want to start fresh. Here's a way, even as an adult, without being condescending or patronizing towards yourself, to switch gears and to jump into a new swimming pool and maybe find the water's fine here. Grass is greener, etc. I am somewhat of a recruiter. All right, so Quadrays could be your door into that. And thank you to Ben Ray Field for doing so much work on this JavaScript rendering of a Quadrays Fluent Quadcraft prototype. All written up here. If you're looking for a place to jump in, I mentioned Python, but it could be a different computer language. JavaScript here has direct access to the 2D canvas in HTML. Maybe you want to go 3D canvas, do more OpenGL. I've done that in Visual Python. Visual Fox Pro did exist, but it wasn't Visual Python. VPython was a good, and maybe still is a good OpenGL door. Check it out, and we'll talk in the next video.